Is this how my life fell apart? Standing on my own front porch at 1:30 in the afternoon, listening to my wife of 12 years laugh intimately with another man in our bedroom? The man's voice was familiar, but it took me a moment to place it. Vincent, her boss. The same Vincent she'd been praising for months as her mentor and career champion. I held my house key in my trembling hand, frozen between the urge to burst through that door and confront them, and the crushing realization that everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a lie. The voices upstairs weren't discussing work projects or client strategies. They were speaking in the soft, affectionate tones of people who were very intimate with each other. That moment on my porch changed everything. But what happened next? The investigation, the evidence gathering, the systematic exposure of their affair, that's what really destroyed their lives. Welcome. This is Cheating Fact, Real Accounts of Deception and Justice. I'm Paul, and before you go anywhere, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Today's story is about how one canceled business trip exposed a months-long affair and brought down two careers in the process. Let me back up and explain how I got to that devastating moment on my front porch. I'm a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company, which means I travel roughly 15 days every month visiting clients and training sales teams. My wife, Vanessa, worked as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized consulting firm downtown, a job she'd held for about 2 years and genuinely seemed to love. We'd been married for 12 years, and while my travel schedule kept us both busy, I thought we were in a solid place. Vanessa frequently mentioned how much she appreciated Vincent's mentorship and how he was helping advance her career. I was actually proud of how dedicated she'd become to her professional development. Last Tuesday was supposed to be the start of a 3-day trip to Phoenix for new team training. I'd already checked in for my flight when I got the call. The client had a family emergency and needed to postpone until the following week. Instead of staying in a hotel for nothing, I decided to surprise Vanessa by coming home early. The flight back was smooth, and I was genuinely excited about surprising her with an unexpected date night. I caught an Uber from the airport, planning to take her somewhere nice for dinner. When I arrived home around 1:30, Vanessa's car was in the driveway. That struck me as odd since she should have been at the office. But I figured maybe she was working from home or had taken a sick day. As I approached our front door, that's when I heard the voices coming from upstairs. Two voices, one unmistakably Vanessa's, and another that I slowly recognized as masculine and familiar. I stopped on our porch, key in hand, and listened. The conversation wasn't professional. It was intimate, personal, affectionate. I heard Vanessa laugh in a way that made my chest tighten. It was soft and loving, the kind of laugh that happens between people who are very close. Then the man's voice became clearer, and my blood went cold. It was Vincent, her boss, in our house, in our bedroom, in the middle of a workday. Every instinct screamed at me to burst through that door and demand answers. I wanted to understand what was happening in my own house, in my own bedroom, with my wife of 12 years. But something stopped me, maybe shock, maybe some survival instinct that told me charging upstairs would only create chaos without giving me real information. I quietly walked back to the street and called another Uber. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a coffee shop, staring at my phone and trying to process what I'd just experienced. The logical part of my brain kept searching for innocent explanations. Maybe Vincent had stopped by to drop off work materials. Maybe they were collaborating on a sensitive project. Maybe I'd misinterpreted what I was hearing. But the gut-wrenching part of my brain knew better. I'd heard intimacy. I'd heard my wife's voice in a context that made me physically sick. I sat in that coffee shop for 3 hours, drinking terrible coffee and watching the clock. Around 5 o'clock, I finally drove home. Vanessa's car was back in the garage, and when I walked through the front door, she was in the kitchen starting dinner like any other day. "Paul," she said, genuinely surprised. "I thought you were in Phoenix until Thursday. What happened?" I explained about the client postponement, and she seemed happy I was home early. She asked about my flight, mentioned she'd had a quiet day working from home, and suggested we order takeout since I was probably tired from traveling. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed like the life I thought I'd been living. But I couldn't shake what I'd heard that afternoon. That night, as Vanessa slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling trying to make sense of the situation. Was I overreacting? Had I misunderstood? Or was my 12-year marriage not what I thought it was? Over the next few days, I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. Vanessa's phone habits, her work schedule, the way she talked about Vincent and her job. I noticed she'd started putting her phone face down whenever I was around, which wasn't like her. She'd developed a habit of taking calls in another room, claiming they were work emergencies requiring privacy. When I'd ask about these urgent matters later, her explanations were always vague. The business dinners and late nights that had become more frequent suddenly seemed suspicious. Vanessa would mention working until 9 or 10, then come home looking energized rather than exhausted. She'd immediately want a shower, then seem restless rather than tired. I realized these late nights and work events only happened when I was traveling. When I was in town, Vanessa rarely mentioned social work activities. She'd also been buying new clothes recently, more stylish, fitted professional wear. When I'd complimented a new dress weeks earlier, she'd said Vincent suggested the team elevate their professional image for client meetings. Individually, these things could have innocent explanations. Combined with what I'd heard that Tuesday afternoon, they painted a picture I didn't want to believe. The breaking point came exactly 1 week later. I was scheduled for a 2-day Denver trip, but I decided to test my suspicions. I told Vanessa I was leaving Wednesday morning for Thursday and Friday meetings, but instead went to a hotel 20 minutes away and waited. Wednesday afternoon, I parked down the street from our house and watched. At 2:15, Vincent's car pulled into our driveway. He went inside, and I sat there feeling my world collapse. They weren't having a work meeting. Vincent was having an affair with my wife, using our house and company time to conduct their relationship. I drove back to my hotel and called in sick for Denver. I needed time to figure out what to do with this information. That evening, Vanessa texted that she was working late and would be home around 10. When she called later, she sounded cheerful, asked about my meetings, and told me about her long day at the office working with Vincent on a challenging client project. Every word felt like a knife. She was lying so easily, so convincingly, about spending the afternoon in our bedroom with her boss. I realized I needed actual evidence. Given how easily she'd been deceiving me, confronting her with suspicions wouldn't work. I spent the next 2 weeks documenting everything. Credit card statements showed charges for restaurants and hotels on days when Vanessa claimed to be working late. I found receipts for lingerie I'd never seen. The most damning evidence came by accident. Last Saturday, Vanessa left her laptop open while showering, and I saw a notification from a messaging app one didn't know she used. When I clicked it, I found months of conversations between Vanessa and Vincent. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning a future together. They discussed leaving their current situations, potentially starting a business together, and had already talked about Vanessa getting divorced. The messages showed they'd been meeting regularly for months, using company time and resources for their personal relationship. What hurt most wasn't just the betrayal. It was how calculated it had been. They'd been planning this for months while I was completely oblivious, traveling for work and actually being proud of Vanessa's career development. I made copies of everything: screenshots, photos, documentation of dates and times. Then I called a lawyer. My attorney advised continuing to gather evidence while filing for divorce, but also mentioned that Vincent and Vanessa's affair might violate company policies about supervisor-subordinate relationships, especially when company time and resources were being misused. I spent another week acting normal while preparing my strategy. I consulted with a private investigator and researched Vanessa's company policies, finding very clear guidelines about workplace relationships and misuse of company time. Yesterday, I put my plan into action. I came home early again, intentionally this time. I called Vanessa and said we needed to talk. When she arrived, I had everything prepared on our dining room table: printed messages, receipts, bank statements, photos, timeline documentation, everything organized and undeniable. Vanessa saw the evidence and went completely white. She tried denying it, then minimizing it, then blaming our marriage and my travel schedule. But the evidence was overwhelming. I told her I'd filed for divorce and she could contact my attorney. Then I told her about the other calls I'd made that morning. I'd contacted her company's HR department and Vincent's supervisor, providing evidence that a supervisor was using company time and resources for an inappropriate relationship with a direct report. I wasn't seeking legal action against the company, but felt they should know about the policy violations. Vanessa begged me not to contact her workplace, but I explained the decision was already made. Their affair had consequences. Beyond our marriage, they'd violated professional ethics and company policy. This morning, both Vanessa and Vincent were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Based on the evidence and company policy, I expect that investigation to conclude quickly. The consequences they're facing aren't revenge. They're the natural result of their own decisions. Companies have policies for good reasons. Marriage involves commitments that, when broken, have legal and financial implications. 12 years of marriage doesn't end without devastating pain. But I learned something important about self-respect and accountability. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal is simply ensuring that actions have appropriate consequences. If you're dealing with betrayal or workplace ethics violations, document everything, consult professionals, and remember that you deserve honesty and respect in all your relationships. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button for more real stories of betrayal and justice, and comment below with your thoughts. I'll see you in the next video.